trying to work out, a way forward when there's active conflict. It's just incredibly complex, like walking through a minefield, really. Distrust, competing goals, every single word matters.
Absolutely. And all the noise around it, statements, different stories. It's hard to know what's actually being proposed or rejected. You almost have to filter everything else out.
Which is exactly what we're aiming for today. We're doing a deep dive using just one source, a CNN article from May 29th, 2025. It reports on a new U.S. ceasefire proposal between Israel and Hamas.
Right.
So our mission is just to unpack what this article says. What's the proposal according to the piece? How did the different sides reportedly react? And what are the key sticking points highlighted in this specific report?
Yeah, like using this one article as a snapshot. What picture does it paint of the situation on that day? We're zooming right in on the claims and counterclaims reported there.
Okay, so let's start with the U.S. proposal itself. Based on what the article says, an Israeli official told CNN. What were the core elements?
Well, this official described basically three main things. First, the release of 10 living hostages.
Okay.
Second, the release of 18 hostages who are deceased. And third, a 60-day truce.
60 days. So clearly focused on a temporary pause and exchange. What did the article say was notably missing from the details that official gave?
Yeah, according to the article, the official, quote, provided no details about the beginning of negotiations for a permanent end to the war.
Ah, right.
And the source straight up says that a permanent end to the fighting is, a key Hamas demand, something Israel has so far refused. So right there, the article flags this fundamental clash in what's reportedly being offered versus what's being demanded.
Temporary versus permanent. That's a huge gap. So how did Israel respond to this specific proposal, according to the CNN piece?
The Israeli official told CNN Israel had accepted it.
Okay.
And the article adds a bit more context. It says Prime Minister Netanyahu told hostage families he'd accepted the proposal from the U.S. envoy, Steve Witkoff. That cited to the hostages and missing families forum.
And did the White House weigh in, according to the source?
Yes. The article quotes the White House press secretary, Caroline Leavitt, confirming the U.S. submitted a proposal. Her words were that Israel backed and supported, and that talks were ongoing. So the report suggests Israeli backing, yes.
But then this is where it gets really tricky, isn't it? The internal Israeli politics, as reported in the article. What kind of divisions does the piece mention?
Oh, absolutely. It highlights a really sharp divide. You've got the far-right finance minister, Bezalel Smotrich, quoted calling the acceptance sheer madness on social media.
Sheer madness.
Yeah, and saying he will not allow such a thing to happen, period. Very definitive.
That's pretty strong opposition from inside the government.
Definitely. But then you contrast that with the opposition leader, Yair Lapid. The article says Lapid urged Netanyahu to accept it publicly and immediately. And he even offered, political backing if the far-right members bolted from the government over it. So you see right there in the article the kind of intense political pressure cooker Netanyahu was reportedly in, pulled in different directions on this specific deal.
So based on the article, Israel says yes, but faces immediate, very loud backlash from the far right, while the opposition actually offers a lifeline. Okay, let's switch to Hamas's reported reaction now, again, just based on the source. What was the initial public word?
Well, the article quotes Bassem Naim. He's identified as being in Hamas's political bureau. Publicly, he said this latest framework came from Israel and does not respond to any of our people's demands, foremost among which is stopping the war and famine.
So a public rejection, basically.
Seems like it, but the article does add that he also said the leadership was still studying it. So maybe, initial dismissal, but perhaps keeping the door slightly ajar internally at that moment.
Okay, studying it. But the article also spoke to a senior Hamas official who gave more detail. What specific counterpoints or conditions did that official raise?
Right, this official laid out three key things. First, about the hostages and the 60-day ceasefire from the U.S. proposal. They said, yeah, they could agree to that, but, and this is crucial, they want U.S. assurances.
Assurances about what?
Assurances that talks on a permanent ceasefire will continue, and critically, that the fighting won't just restart after the 60 days are up.
Okay. So that demand for a U.S. guarantee on the permanent end, that sounds like their absolute bottom line reading this report. What else?
Second, they wanted humanitarian aid to go through UN channels, specifically United Nations.
Right.
And third, they demanded the IDF, the Israeli forces, pull back to the positions they held back on March 2nd, 2025.
Okay, so very specific conditions, the duration guarantee, the aid route, troop locations. Now, what really jumps out in the article is the senior Hamas official's story about how this proposal even came about. They seem to think the terms had changed.
Yes, exactly. This official gave a specific narrative. They said they'd responded to U.S. envoy Witkoff via an intermediary, Bashar Baba. The official claimed they'd discussed terms with Baba just 2 days before, terms that were then sent to Witkoff.
Okay.
But then, according to this Hamas official in the article, after Witkoff met with an Israeli official, Ron Dermer, earlier that week, quote, everything changed 100%.
Everything changed 100%. That's a really strong claim about the process itself being reported here.
It really is. And the official then described the latest proposal they got from Witkoff as basically an Israeli paper. The implication being it wasn't the mediated deal they thought they were discussing, but mostly reflected Israel's position.
And there's that quote from the official in the article that just kind of sums up their whole stance, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. The quote is, "We are ready to return all the hostages in one day. Just we want a guarantee that war will not come again after that." Now, in this paper, we didn't find it. They want to continue the war. We want to stop this. I mean, that puts their core demand and their view of this proposal's failure very bluntly, as reported here.
And tied into that demand for the war to end, the article mentions this official saying Hamas would be ready to release half the remaining living hostages, about 20 were left then, so maybe 10, but calling it a big risk. Why a risk, from their perspective in the report?
Well, the official basically linked it to trust, a lack of trust that Israel would actually hold up its end of the bargain, beyond the initial exchange.
Right.
That the ceasefire wouldn't just be temporary. It points right back to that deep trust deficit that Hamas highlights in this source as a major block.
And the article gives a specific past example mentioned by that Hamas official, right?
Right.
About trust.
Yeah. The same official brought up something from the Trump era, after the release of Eden Alexander. They claimed promises weren't kept like an expected thank you from President Trump, and more importantly, humanitarian aid that they said didn't flow into Gaza right away like they thought it would. So that specific past grievance, as reported by the official, kind of fuels their current demand for much stronger guarantees this time around.
You can really see the history weighing on these talks. The official also seemed to think the U.S. envoy, Witkoff, was key.
They did, yeah. The article quotes the official saying, "We know that Witkoff is a strong man. He can do something. He's the only one who can impact Israel." So from their viewpoint, Witkoff was seen as having this unique leverage with the Israeli side.
And then there's that Facebook post from Bassem Naim mentioned in the article claiming a deal had been agreed with Witkoff last week, and this new Israeli paper just means perpetuating the occupation and continuing the killing and famine. That public claim seems to echo the senior official's story about a negative shift.
Right. Both Hamas voices reported in the article suggest that, from their perspective, this latest proposal felt like a step backwards, fundamentally different and worse than something they thought was on the table earlier, mainly because it lacked that solid guarantee the war would end.
Yeah.
But it's important to note, despite all these criticisms of this proposal, the senior Hamas official does end by saying, quote, "Hamas is very, very interested to reach an agreement to end the war and return the hostages." So the article shows that even with the sharp disagreement on these terms, the stated desire to reach some kind of agreement was still there, according to this source.
Okay, so let's just take a step back. Looking only at what this one CNN article reported on May 29th, what's the overall picture?
Well, what this source really lays bare is a negotiation tangled in different versions of events and fundamentally opposed priorities. You've got Hamas, as reported here, demanding that guaranteed permanent end to the war,
right,
versus the Israeli proposal, as described by their official in the piece, which is focused on this temporary 60-day pause and getting hostages out, but not explicitly tackling that permanent end demand.
And layered on top of that core conflict, the article shows us that intense political pressure inside Israel over even accepting a temporary deal. Plus, this deep mistrust from the Hamas side driving their need for specific guarantees.
Exactly. And understanding those specific friction points reported here, the whole back and forth on how the proposal changed, the demand for U.S. assurances, the arguments over aid channels or troop lines, the history of mistrust, the internal politics, that's what helps you understand why it's so hard to get a deal. The article shows you the concrete reasons, not just saying it's complicated.
And it reminds us, too, this is all happening while there are major humanitarian concerns, which the piece briefly mentions aid issues, UN concerns adding this layer of urgency.
Yeah, the details in this single source really sketch out a negotiation wrestling with just incompatible core demands, old grievances, and significant political hurdles, especially on the Israeli side as reported here.
Okay, so to sum up what we pulled from just this CNN article, there's a reported U.S. proposal for a temporary truce and hostage exchange. But the big obstacle, based on Hamas's reported reaction in this piece, is getting solid U.S. guarantees for a permanent end to the war, plus specific conditions on aid and troops.
Right. And meanwhile, Israel reportedly accepted that proposal, but faces, serious political fights internally over even that temporary step.
So considering that deep mistrust reported by one side in this article and the clear internal conflicts on the other, kind of makes you wonder, doesn't it, based purely on this source?
Yeah, the question you're left with is, can a 60-day truce, without that explicit agreement or the strong U.S. assurances on a permanent end that Hamas is demanding here, actually build trust or lead to lasting peace? Or does it just, kick the can down the road, leaving those fundamental disagreements ready to explode again once the 60 days are up?
It certainly underlines just how incredibly challenging the path forward looked based on the snapshot provided by this one report.